Fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the best Rangers podcast in town. I'm Andrew Chonley alongside Nick Zararis. We scream about the Rangers so that you don't have to. This is episode 73, live on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, and we are available wherever you get your podcasts as well. If you missed it, Sam Rosen joined us last week to preview the season. A must-watch. Go take a listen. Had some very insightful things to say about the team. Hey, Nick, by the way, I don't know if you saw this earlier today, but the Winnipeg Jets signed Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck to these massive contract extensions, and the team account beat out our friends, the Insiders, once again. What an unserious league we find ourselves in, I swear.
Let's attack this. We'll knock both out and get to the main point of today's episode. First of all, Winnipeg does that just because they want to make the playoffs. They don't care about winning the Stanley Cup. They don't care about the long-term future of the team. They very shamelessly tried to guilt fans into buying season ticket subscriptions at the end of last season under the guise of, if you guys don't buy enough season tickets, we might have to move the team because we're not going to have enough money. And keeping Scheifele and Hellebuyck in Winnipeg does two things. One, it gives you marketable players. And number two, it will keep the Jets from bottoming out. It will keep them from being a dumpster fire. Both those guys are in their 30s. They are not going to make it to the end of those contracts as effective players. The Jets know that. They know that. This is about narratives. This is more about narratives than it's about hockey. And then as for the Insiders are too busy chasing clicks. The reorganization of Twitter, the way the algorithm works now, it is just nasty. The stuff I see Insiders tweeting to get engagement on their tweets, it is just shamelessly nasty stuff. It's not worth the frustration, frankly. Go give me your take real quick on Hellebuyck and Scheifele, and then we can move on to the actual nuts and bolts of today's show.
Connor Hellebuyck is an elite goaltender, and he was if the Devils got Connor Hellebuyck, they would have maybe won 70 games. That's how good they would have been. Now, without Connor Hellebuyck, they're going to actually look like human beings on the ice. Like, Connor Hellebuyck is one of the elite goalies in the NHL, and we don't talk about him enough because Winnipeg is just not that great of a team. And also, there were rumors, apparently, that he was never going to play in Winnipeg again and all these things, and now, what do you know? $8.5 million a year for the next millennia makes you sign on the dotted line. Like, Connor Hellebuyck is one of the best goalies in the league. Mark Scheifele puts up a lot of points. He's great offensively, can't do anything defensively. So if you need somebody that will put up a lot of stats and will score goals and will be flashy on that end of the ice, he's one of the best to do it. If you need him to skate back, ask somebody else.
That's effectively what it is. The Jets are content with where they are, and they want to stay where they are because their ownership is very shameless in their endeavors to try and do as little work as possible while also making as much money as possible. So let's get to the point of today's episode. We're a few days away from Rangers hockey. They start on the road in Buffalo, then they go to Columbus, and then they're here for the home opener next week. We're still a couple days away, and naturally, it makes sense to try and think a little bit out of the orthodoxy. Everybody's doing predictions. Everybody's trying to get a gauge on what type of team this is going to be. So we opted for something a little bit different, a little bit of a thought exercise to kind of work this out as more of a conversation as opposed to just us talking our thoughts at you guys, the audience, because that's not fun to be talked at to. The entire point of this is to try and make this a conversation where you've had a couple beers and you just decided to go nonverbal and you're sitting there listening to us talk about this. So starting with the biggest question, you and I both had this on our lists of questions. Number one, can the Rangers finally drive play at 5-on-5? Why or why not? Which side of the argument do you want to take? And I will take the other one.
I have a feeling the answer is probably going to be yes, but maybe not as far as we'd like them to, because I see a step in the right direction for this team. They can't possibly be as bad 5-on-5 as they have been in recent years. They can't rely on the power play. That was one of the biggest issues that we had in the playoffs last season. Was they just tried to hold on for dear life, and they would rely on the power play to get things done for them. But that's not how you win hockey games. 85% of every game is at 5-on-5, and the Rangers have a lot of talent to not need to just cling for dear life and to just hope the refs are going to call penalties. The Rangers have the talent, they have the skill to dominate or at least drive play at even strength. And with Peter Laviolette at the helm, who is actually supposedly making the team practice, what is, a revelation in head coaching, Nick. I don't know if you know, but with a head coach that actually cares about the little things, that wants things done the right way and his way, and I would have to imagine with some of these names on the team that it is now time for them to take the right direction and actually do things at 5-on-5 instead of just holding on.
I tried to think about this in terms of what's different. So we obviously have a different coach. The fourth line has been overhauled. We're not going into the season with spare parts fourth line like last year. We talked about this a few weeks ago. The fourth line on opening night last year was Kravtsov, Ryan Carpenter, and Ryan Reeves. Those are spare parts on a good. Those are spare parts. Those are a prospect who who has yet to show anything at the NHL level, who never really got a real shot to stick. An enforcer who is here for the vibes, and a low event center who played on some bad teams the last couple of years. And they told Ryan Carpenter, do everything you can. And he couldn't. You were asking one guy to do the work of three. So at face value, the fourth line is better. And you gave Braden Schneider a partner who can actually handle the puck. So at a baseline level of talent, the opportunity to be a better possession team is there. And the thing that I think makes the Rangers a better possession team this season, at least in theory, and then I'll give you the counterpoint of why they might not be, is they have played so much defense the last 3 years. They have been hemmed in their own end for extended periods of time. They have encouraged low event hockey, forced the other team to the perimeter, let them shoot from wherever they want to shoot from, encourage them to take shots, recover the puck, counterattack, go the other way. Now, at least in theory, from what we understand, it seems like they are being encouraged to skate the puck out of danger in the defensive zone, activating the defenseman to get involved in the rush, to try and turn it into more of a numbers game as opposed to a skill game, which is what the Rangers had done in the past on the rush. When they were able to recover those loose pucks in the defensive zone and spring their guys going the other way, it was often 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s, looking for that cross-seam pass, the one-timer, or a long-distance shot. Now, in theory, if you're going to bring the defenseman up into that rush, and whether or not it's a good idea to encourage a Jacob Trouba, a Braden Schneider, guys who they have okay puck skills, but to encourage them to engage in offense more, considering what we talked about last week, 2 weeks ago, where we mentioned how Trouba was a 2% shooter, how he had the 177th best shooting percentage of all defensemen, but he took the fourth most shots of any defenseman in the entire league. I don't know if it's a good thing or not to encourage him to shoot more, but at the very least, I feel, and I think I could say you feel, that the talent for a better play is there. And this will segue us nicely into our next question in a minute, but in theory, everything to be good possession-wise is there. The counterpoint is, and why I could see them being probably 48, 49% in most of the key possession metrics, it's really hard to break habits. That's the biggest thing, and I think that's going to be the undercurrent of a lot of these questions, and a lot of this season, frankly, is how much difference is just practice and the voice in the room going to get guys to play differently, because these are guys who have gotten very comfortable. You mentioned it when we were talking with Sam last week that David Quinn talked about this, Gerard Gallant talked about this, the overpassing, the effort being inconsistent, the coming out of the gate slow, all of that stuff is a habit that didn't just spring up out of nowhere. That happened over a long extended period of time where they realized, oh, we can get away playing like this and win 50 out of the 82 games in the regular season. That's good with me. And you develop those bad habits and you end up where they were last year.
I think one of the biggest differences the Rangers have this season that I feel like is going to help out more than people realize is Erik Gustafsson.
Yeah.
The fact that the Rangers have on all three pairs now a defenseman that isn't terrified of handling the puck is so critical to this team's success. We have to stop for a second and realize that Braden Schneider had Ben Harper. He had these guys on the third line pair with him who were so afraid of doing anything that their first thought whenever they had the puck was get rid of it as fast as you possibly can. Now with Eric Gustafsson in that third defenseman slot, he is not only capable of handling the puck, he's confident with it. He likes to skate out with the puck. He likes joining the rush. And that, by default, is going to drive the offense in a positive way for this team. It's not just Adam Fox and K'Andre Miller doing everything. Okay, you have those two, but now also you have Eric Gustafsson who can also do these things. It's every pair the Rangers have now is they're not afraid of handling the puck. They're not afraid of bobbling it or, oh my God, hot potato, I got to get rid of it. I don't want it. Somebody else. I got to get out of. I got to get off for a change. I'm scared. Mom, come pick me up, please. Like there's now players on every pairing that are confident with the puck and they know what to do with it. And that is that's such a big part of the offense. It's one thing to have the puck, but if you don't know what to do with it, you're not generating any offense. But now that Gustafsson is here and he is on the team, I think the Rangers by default are going to be better offensively because he's so confident when he's handling the puck.
I agree with you in that respect that by playing less defense, they will get better possession numbers. That's just simple math. If you're not playing defense, you can't be conceding chances against, which has been the issue, especially 2 years ago. The first year of Gallant, they were atrocious at 5-on-5. They were in the 20s in most of the key stats there, and they got driven by a Vezina winning goalie and a otherworldly power play. They were second in the league on the power play, and they had the goalie win the Vezina. That covered up a lot of mistakes. Last year, they paid the price eventually. Their bad habits caught up with them by the end of the season, because by the time it came for them to play the Devils, they had built up these habits over the course of an entire season. They were not particularly comfortable. And as soon as the Devils figured out how the Rangers wanted to play, there was nothing the Rangers could do to kind of mitigate that. And that was something we talked about with Sam, and I was thinking about over the course of the last week. How do you slow down a team that's faster than you? You have to make them work for all of the space and that space on the ice. And that means pinching up in the neutral zone, forcing them to dump the puck in, winning your puck battles, and then clean zone exits. Part of the reason the Devils looked so fast is the Rangers were in their own end so often, and the Devils used their foot speed to exacerbate those differences. When you are constantly in your own zone, you are going to be worn out. You are going to be tired. The other team is going to be fresher because they're not going to have to work as hard. And over the course of a series, that wears you down. Of course, we're getting ahead of ourselves talking about the playoffs, but the last thought on 5-on-5 play. The talent is here. It is simply a matter of if the talent believes. And that's what Sam said. Is there a hunger in that group? Is there an attitude of what happened last year is unacceptable? We're better than that, and we know it, and we need to come out here and we need to play like we're capable of. Or is this group going to do what they've done historically, which is fall on what they're good at, ride that as long as they can, and then get a sobering dose of reality the first time they face a really good team?
It's time now for the big guys on this team to realize that these playoff issues are not going to fix themselves. Peter Laviolette is not going to come in and magically make them shoot the puck. David Quinn was mad about it. Gallant was mad about it. Peter Laviolette. I was at the Bruins preseason game on Thursday when they passed the puck around 8,000 times on the power play, and the fans were booing. It's the preseason. Fans are booing because the Rangers spent 2 minutes, 4 minutes. They had a double minor power play. All they did was pass it around, and then the puck went out of the zone. That was the entire power play. Peter Laviolette was not happy about it on the bench. You could see he was not having a great time. Like the big guys on this team have to understand that Laviolette is not going to, turn the controller on and play for them. They have to shoot the puck. This is the most basic thing about the sport is that if you want pucks to go in the net, you got to shoot. You can't you're not going to score by passing. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to score forcing the ESPN highlight reel play. It might happen once every few games, but that's not how you score a majority of these goals. If you're at the blue line, just throw it on. Like if there's not a whole lot of things you can do with the puck at the blue line, but you have some slight window to maybe just throw it at the net and maybe you get some deflection or maybe there's a scramble in front of the net. I would so much rather you do that than force a pass that's never going to end in anything remotely positive offensively. I hope that the Rangers, big guys like Zibanejad, Panarin, Kreider, these guys that we're talking about, understand that at a certain point you have to shoot. That is, in order to win games, you got to score goals. And how do you score goals? You got to shoot the puck.
That, I think, is one of the things I find so fascinating about hockey, especially in relations to the other sports, is just how little input the coach actually has in the flow of the game. Like all the other sports to some degree have organized plays. I know baseball, we're talking about things like the hit and run and stuff like that, which is a little less nuanced than like design plays like you see in football and soccer and basketball. But so much of hockey comes down to player decision making. And the way you get good decisions made by your players is your systems, your practice, the way you build them up, the work you're doing on the side, not in games. Because once you're in the flow of the game, you're going to fall back in your habits. It's very difficult to get out of those habits, which is why I'm so curious about it. And that brings us to our second question. Is Laviolette a needle mover like the Rangers think he is? I'll go first because you went first last time. Very simple, very straightforward. I think he's a 1-year sugar high. I don't think that anything beyond this year, you are going to get a discernible difference. You will get the new coach bump. That is a real thing. Whenever teams that make the playoffs get a new coach the following season, they typically make the playoffs again, and they are a little bit better in the regular season. There are on occasion situations where it flames out badly, but for all intents and purposes, I feel pretty okay that it's not the talent. It is what the talent does that's going to be the deciding factor this year. And at the very least, it seems like Laviolette is giving them a pushback that he's going to give it to them if they're not living up to what he wants them to do. Sam said it, that they are working really hard in practice. I know last week they ran like an hour and a half practice on an off day, which that's like basic math, six and a half times longer than a Gerard Gallant practice, which must have been very frustrating for those guys. But at the same time, do your job and you won't have to have an hour and a half long practice. So I turn it over to you with the premise, in theory, yes, he can do the basics to get them closer. But I don't think he's a needle mover in the same way that going from like Bruce Cassidy to Jim Montgomery was for the Bruins.
I think the answer by default is yes, but the answer of by how much, we have no idea. Because when you go off of what Gerard Gallant was doing with the team, wasn't a whole lot. Like you said, they weren't practicing. Gallant never called timeouts during games. He never strayed from his plan A in games. If things weren't going well during a game, very rarely would they ever change the way that they played, ever change the way that they wanted to do certain things. It was always my way, this one way, or the highway, and that was it. With Peter Laviolette, there's a lot more nuance. Peter Laviolette actually makes the team practice, which is nice. Peter Laviolette, I would have to understand, has more than one plan in the back of his pocket. If plan A doesn't work, I would have to imagine that Peter Laviolette, who has coached for 75 years, has a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. He has different ways of going about doing things. Also, he calls timeouts when things aren't working, which is great. You don't get to sell them on the black market if you don't use them. You got them, you might as well use them. Like, Peter Laviolette, by default, is a needle mover because of the stark difference from his coaching style to what Gallant was doing. So it was addition by subtraction to get Gallant out of the head coaching spot here. Now Peter Laviolette, who actually brings in a system and structure and, and other ways of making the team better here to New York. So by that method, he's a needle mover off the rip. Now, how much is he a needle mover from that point to winning the Stanley Cup? We don't know. And the first month of the season, we won't know. Because if you remember the first month of Gallant and the first month of Alain Vigneault when they made it to the Stanley Cup final in 2014, that month was atrocious. That was the 9-2 Sharks win. That was the Marty Beener retirement ceremony. Like, that was, and then they made it to the final. The first month is going to look not great. They're figuring out a system, give them time. And now it's up to, okay, I want to see how this team plays from like Thanksgiving to April. Obviously, you want to win as many games in the first 6 weeks as you want, and like 82% or whatever percent of teams that are in a playoff spot come Thanksgiving make it to the playoffs, and all these things. But I want to see how this team plays, because if they are genuinely looking better on the ice, then my answer is a pretty big needle mover. If they look the same or they have a lot of the same tendencies, then, a little bit because of what Gerard Gallant didn't do. But it remains to be seen.
Okay, so 2 things off of that. Number 1, I did something about this the other day because I was curious and I went and looked it up. So the last 5 Ranger head coaches, so Gallant, Quinn, Vigneault, Tortorella, and Tom Renney. First month, so I did first 30 days, which they're different amounts of games, but they're all between 13 and 15. So Gallant, of 28 standings points, he got 19. Of 28 standings points, David Quinn, 13. Of 26 standing points, Alain Vigneault got 12. Of 30, Tortorella got 19. Of 30, Tom Renney got 19. So we're talking about a 570, 580 points percentage in that range is what Rangers head coaches have done in their first month. Tortorella took over a team in season. Vigneault, Quinn, Gallant all starting at the beginning of a following season. So I think there's a good chance there are going to be bumps, especially based on how the preseason went, where they just didn't really, they look clunky. They didn't really have a good feel for anything. And that's to be expected. We're talking about a group that got this program installed 2.5 weeks ago, and then was tasked with playing 7 preseason games over the course of those 2 weeks. They're going to be learning on the fly and figure it out. And then number 2, this is a follow-up question based on his Laviolette needle mover. Do you think a better coach could have gotten a better result with last year's team, or do you think that team's habits were just too ingrained that even if they get by the Devils, they're probably not beating Carolina or Florida?
I think a better coach would have gotten the Rangers to at least the second round.
That I agree with.
Like, there was no world in which the Rangers went up in 2-0 in the first 2 games, only for them to just utterly collapse. Like, the Devils take game 3, okay.
That was overtime too. You can live with that.
Yeah, right, and that was overtime, and then they got thoroughly embarrassed in game 4, if I remember correctly. Like, the Rangers failed their plan A after the first 2 games, and there was just no fundamental change. It was the same exact style. It was the same exact everything. They never tweaked anything, never strayed far from the path. And they played 82 games before then like it was a walk in the park. Like, it's fine. Oh, we'll make it there. It's all good. We could turn the switch on at any moment in time. Like, if Peter Laviolette was coaching this team last season, for example, I highly doubt that would have been the thought process throughout the season. I don't know if it might have still lingered a little bit here and there, but I don't think it would have been as egregious as it was last year. The lack of just caring from a lot of guys before the playoffs was just gross, and it might not have been eliminated completely, but it would have been a lot better, I feel like, under somebody else that's not Gerard Gallant. So, yeah, I don't know if they make it far or whatever, but I do think they would have at least made it to the second round.
So it was game 5 where they got cooked. Game 5, they lost 4-0. That was the one that Drury and Gallant supposedly had the shouting match afterwards that got more than one person reported at the time. So on that point, I completely agree with you. All they had to do was win one more of these games. The Devils were a good team last year. There's no doubt about that. They were not good enough to win 4 out of 5. You know what I mean? You win first 2 games. All you have to do is win 2. Yeah, you won the first 2 at the Devils, and you look good in both games. You were outscoring them 10-2 through 2 games, and then once your power play dried up, you didn't win. I've cited this stat more than once. They didn't win in any of the games. They didn't score on the power play in that series, which goes to show you how difficult it was. And to your point about doing the same thing over and over again, the only line in that series that was moderately effective later in the series was the 4th line, because they were the only line that was taking the puck to the net. They were the only group that wasn't settling for shots from the perimeter, that wasn't settling for point shots. They were dumping the puck in, going to work below the goal line, and trying to outwork the Devils, which is the only way to beat the Devils, is to outwork them. You saw Carolina do it. Carolina is objectively a less talented team than the Devils. That's not a controversial statement. But Carolina outworked them. They maintained their structure. They kept doing their process over and over and over again and imposed their will on the series. And the longer it went on, the Devils wilted. The Rangers have not shown the ability to play a consistent way that is able to dictate the way a game goes. So much of the way the Rangers played under Gallant was rooted in reacting, counterattacking, being able to, as the game got on, get better as the game went on. They terrible in the first period under Gallant, always come out good in the second, and then the issue was they would be down 3-0 or down 3-1 after one period, and you're chasing the entire game. And it's really difficult to come from behind when you were chasing, because the game changes, because what the other team is going to do to and facilitate you playing a certain type of way, they're going to encourage you to take crappy shots. They want you to take those shitty shots from the perimeter because it helps their cause. So in theory, I think through these two questions, we both feel that the opportunity is there. I think we're in agreement on that. The opportunity for real improvement is there.
Yeah, I agree. Like in theory, they were really not great at it last season, and now with a guy at the helm that actually wants improvement, I would think that would actually come in and, hey, here is how we're going to play, and that starts with, hey, let's actually practice. Who would have thunk that in order to get better at something, you got to practice?
Somewhere Allen Iverson's rolling his eyes, eating his what is it? TGI Fridays. His TGI Fridays appetizers.
We talk about practice?
Talking about practice. Okay, this is a hot button question. This player has pretty much driven the Rangers offseason discourse, which is crazy considering he's like the 8th best forward on the team. And that's the first overall pick from 2 years ago. I asked it this way. What does a successful season for Lafreniere look like? And that might not be counting stats, which is a point I made the other day to somebody I was talking with. I don't need him to put up 70 points. If he puts up 50 points, but has flashes of being a dynamic player, that's good for me. That's good enough.
I want him to at least get close to 50.
Yeah.
Like, while I understand that counting stats aren't the end-all be-all, and it's all a matter of how he plays, because he could be like Trocheck last season and hit 26 posts. That could happen in Lafreniere, and you could end up with like 14 goals, where you could have had 30 if some of those shots just didn't go off the post. Like that happens, and that it is what it is. But in a normal season, when variability isn't too one way or the other, I really expect Lafreniere to at least get close to 50 points. This is, and Sam talked about this when we had him on last week. And by the way, if you missed it, go check it out. It was a great conversation. I need to see Lafreniere be a bigger player. Does that not physically, just somebody that when he's out on the ice is more noticeable on more shifts. Because again, he has flashes. He has those shifts relatively consistently of him, either driving play or getting the puck from the corner or battling for the loose puck and getting possession of it like that. I want to see him do that more. This is his 4th season in the NHL, first overall pick. He has a boatload of talent. I want to see it now. This is not his first cup of coffee in the NHL. He's been around the block. He's been through different head coaches. He's been paired with superstar players in the NHL. Now it's up to Lafreniere to really start putting it all together. Give me close to 50 points, and then we'll talk.
So 2 points off of that. Number one, points-wise, yeah. 50, I think, would be a solid, you can point to that even if the detractors who don't actually watch the games but accuse us of not watching the games. If he puts up 50 points, you can say, well, he put up 50 points playing 12, 13 minutes a night, not getting a ton of power play time. That's good. But the big thing for me, and you alluded to this, is how he plays. The biggest thing I look for when I'm evaluating somebody's confidence, not just like how they're playing, their confidence, is how engaged they are in the play. This is something that I want to say either Travis Yost or Jack Hahn wrote about a few years ago in evaluating young players. And Marty St. Louis talked about this in regards to, I want to say Slavkovsky, but I might be wrong. How many times a game do they touch the puck? Are they in puck battles? Are they winning puck battles? I don't care as much like what they do once they get it, but at the very least, are they in the play? Are they making things happen? Or are they floating around? If they're floating around, they're not engaged, they're not touching the puck a lot, that tells me they're not very confident. They'd rather play it to not make a mistake as opposed to trying to dictate how the game is going. Again, in theory, if you're playing Lafreniere third line left wing, which it might be the case because they're still waiting for if Heedle's going to play or not and what they're going to do at center, which might force Gaudreau to play center. We'll worry about that when we get there. But if Lafreniere's playing third line left wing, you are going to have opportunities. When good teams have good third lines, it's often because they have a third line that's better than the other teams and they're able to outlast them. You just have more depth. You can win those bottom six situations, and that helps. But if he's going to play with Zibanejad and Kreider or with Panarin and Trocheck or Heedle, they need to find that next gear. And I was talking about this with Fitz, I want to say over the summer, I want to say like mid-July. And the player we both thought that he was the trajectory on, and he's obviously not there, anywhere near there, was a Brad Marchand type of pest, pain in the ass, constantly in the game, engaging. And that's when he was at his best in those playoffs 2 years ago, was when he was in the mix. Every single loose puck, he was getting into it after the whistle. He was making dynamic plays happen with making it and setting guys up to make good plays. And he's a good facilitator. But until they get his confidence and his headspace there to utilize his talents, he's going to continue to be this frustrating talent, because I don't want to hear any more, well, they should have taken Stützle, they should have taken Byfield. This is a consensus number one overall pick from the time he was 15 years old. I knew who this kid was when he was in high school. We are not doing revisionist history of, well, how could the Rangers mess this up? The Rangers messed this up. A player with that pedigree at that development, at that trajectory of development, at the time when they drafted him, I remember reading a Corey Pronman article comparing him to the other first round picks. The closest comp was McDavid, McKinnon, and then him based on their development in junior hockey. We are talking about somebody that was supposed to be the slam dunk, can't miss prospect. Those guys miss occasionally, but there is talent there. You see the flashes of it. And I know a lot of people are ready to give up. I understand the frustration. For 2 years, I have said the time would come where they were going to need him and Kakko to be difference makers. Instead of giving them the opportunity to figure that out when the stakes weren't as high, they waited until the last minute. Now those guys need to hit if this team is going to take a step, and there's not a lot of margin for error. So I understand why the stakes are so high and why he's dominated the narrative of the offseason.
I think the best way to describe whether Lafreniere's had a good season or not is every time he's on the ice, if his name is said by the broadcaster. Like, that is important, because if you're out there, but you're not doing anything, the broadcasters are not saying your name. But if you are getting the loose puck, if you get shots to the net, if you get a nice pass, if you have possession and you're not, just throwing it away, if you're doing things on the ice that aren't just skating, the broadcasters, whether it be Sam Rosa, whether it be the national broadcast, whoever, is going to say your name. That means you are actively doing something other than cardio when it's your shift. It will be a successful season for Lafreniere if every time he's on the ice, the broadcast team says his name.
You want to see him in the mix. That's the thing. He needs to be engaged because that's an element of his game. He is one of their better retrievers and battlers. When they were at their best 2 years ago, he was, I want to say it was Kreider and then him in puck retrievals 2 years ago. And that's a counting stat. There are this many opportunities, he recovers this amount of them. So the skill set is there to be an effective player. It's just a matter of how effective. Now, this brings us to a simple question. What is your biggest roster fear? And this is open-ended intentionally. This can be a player that you don't want them to go out and get that they may or may not be able to get. A roster decision, whether it be trading somebody, calling someone up, sending someone down, or a player you're just genuinely like, I don't see it.
I mean, the obvious answer is Jonathan Quick, because ideally, we want Shesterkin to play 55, 57 games. And if Jonathan Quick is the Jonathan Quick that we saw last season, Shesterkin's gonna have to play 70 games. Like
Yeah, and you can't do that.
this is not going to end well. A starting goaltender in the NHL to be as healthy and as fresh for the playoffs has to play max 60 games. Max. Because if you wear out your starting goaltender in February, come May, they are going to be running on fumes. That is just how things go, and you have. Like, there's a lot of evidence to back this up. Like you can't just play a goalie 82 games in 2023 and expect to win in the playoffs. It's just not going to happen. Like you need your backup goalie to come in and at least be somewhat reliable. The problem with Jonathan Quick is, other than the fact that he's a Rangers fan, is not doing anything to instill confidence in me in his ability to play 25 games and be okay. He was awful last season. He was awful in the preseason. He looked out of place on so many of those goals. He was like flopping all over. He made himself super small. He's not a big guy. He makes himself even smaller in net. He leaves a lot of open spots for shooters to shoot at. I don't like how he plays in 2023. So my biggest roster fear is that the Rangers completely hit it. You know, they took a swing and missed on the backup goalie because he's a Rangers fan and because he has rings. Great. But can he play? The answer is no. So if he doesn't work out, what's their plan B? Is it going to be Dylan Garand, who's 21 and right now in Hartford? Is it going to be? I mean, the Maple Leafs just waived Martin Jones, who Rangers luckily didn't claim. That would have been a disaster. Like Martin Jones isn't very good either. Is that their plan B? Is that their plan C? Like who would they go and acquire if Jonathan Quick doesn't pan out? Which he has a high probability of not doing that. So if that fails, what is the solution for Chris Drury that would see the Rangers not have to rely on Shesterkin game in and game out?
It is of the utmost importance. They do everything they can to maintain Shesterkin. This is a gift. You cannot squander a gift. I know I say that as a team that squandered the best goalie of his generation for 15 years, and they look to be doing the same thing with one of the 3 or 4 best goalies of his time period. Do not think just because you have the good goalie that all your other problems go away. He is a very good eraser. He masks a lot of issues, but he is not infallible, as the Devils series proved. He finished with the second most goals saved above expected of any goalie in the playoffs, and he played 7 games. He played 7 games, and he had the second most goals saved above expected of any goalie in last year's playoffs. He did everything he possibly could, and the team just had nothing for him. They had nothing for him. So to your point about managing the goaltending situation properly, Garand is 21. He played his first professional season last year in Hartford. He didn't have great numbers. He was not on a good team. You give him a little bit benefit of the doubt in that respect. If they throw a 21-year-old into the fire and say, we need a 901, 902 save percentage, 20 starts, let's go, Dylan, they are setting themselves up for a disaster. That sounds hyperbolic. They can probably get by with Shesterkin starting 60 games, them winning 40 of those, and maybe they sneak into 5 to 10 of those Garand ones, and then overtime losses, and you can probably get to 96, 97 points you're going to need, but that's going to put you at one of the wild cards. Last year, if they did not come out of the gate so badly last year, there's a real argument they could have finished in second or first in the division. How much home ice would have mattered versus the Devils? I don't know. But if they played, Carolina played the Islanders. If the Rangers played the Islanders in the first round last year, I think they probably could have beaten the Islanders a little bit easier than they could have beaten the Devils. These games matter. I know a lot of people look at the games where you play the backup goalie as waving the white flag. It's if you win the game, that's great. Good teams don't think like that. Good teams send their backup out there and expect to win with their backup goalie in net too. And the Rangers need to carry themselves like that. I know Halak got off to a rough start last year. By about January, I felt fine when Halak was playing. I wasn't worried about him. I was worried about the team in front of him.
Yeah, I would rather they've re-signed Halak, I'll be
Me too.
honest, than sign Jonathan Quick. I get it. He's a Rangers fan. I get it. He grew up wearing the jersey, and I get it. He has 3 Stanley Cup rings, one of which he just kind of sat on the bench for. But like, hey, they all count. They don't ask how. They ask how many. So I guess they all count the same. But like, it's the same issue the Rangers had with Patrick Kane, where it was about what they did versus what they could do, which I don't like that thought process, and it backfired on the Rangers heavy last season come playoff time. Patrick Kane, when he didn't have the puck on his stick, was an atrocity. He was awful, 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 awful when he didn't have the puck on his stick, and the Rangers saw that. We're like, run it back. Let's run it back. How bad could it be? And then they went and signed Jonathan Quick, who is past his prime, and they signed him because of his resume, not because of what kind of job he can do for them in 2023-24. So that is my biggest concern right now. There are others that, we talk about Lafreniere and how big of a step he can make and the 5-on-5 and all of that. But if Shesterkin doesn't have any help and they're scrambling for a second goalie, and they're going to run him into the ground while they figure that out, that's going to be a problem.
Who was the dude on the Warriors 2 years ago who was a DNP but went into the locker room to change into his uniform to have the trophy and be in the team picture? That's what Jonathan Quick did on the Kings last year. The Golden Knights last year.
Yeah.
He was along for the ride. He was not an active participant in said ride.
He was there. He was part of the team. Just like, just like the owner is. He's there. He gets to be part of the picture, but that doesn't mean he played. Like, he's operating the team. He gets a jersey, right? Jonathan Quick got a jersey. The owner has a jersey. Same process to the Stanley Cup. Jonathan Quick didn't help. Owner didn't help. Owner paid the checks, kind of just sat back and watched. Jonathan Quick got paid, sat on the bench, and watched.
The Blue Jackets should have kept him. It would have been hilarious if Jonathan Quick got shelled on the Blue Jackets for the last 20 games of the regular season last year.
So here's a question that I have for you. That is, I don't know if it's a funny question or a sad question. If the Columbus Blue Jackets had kept Jonathan Quick and he played awful for them, did the Rangers sign him?
There's a good chance no. There's a good chance that everybody would have been like, oh, he's done. Like the narrative would have been very different.
Right.
Versus he went to Vegas. He only made, I think, 9 starts in the regular. I think he started 9 games total once he got there, or something to that effect. And he was bad. I think it was like an .890 save percentage. League average last year was .895. So we're talking about somebody who was below average on a good team. Vegas actually drives possession, unlike the Rangers at 5-on-5. Vegas, who famously, of the 99 goals that happened at 5-on-5 play on their run to the Stanley Cup final, scored 66 of the 99 5-on-5 goals, which the Rangers couldn't do that in 2 seasons.
Nope.
They could not do that in 2 seasons. So I have one last question for you, and we'll wrap up here. What is more likely? The Rangers make it to a conference final or miss the playoffs altogether? I asked you this question last year as the last question on our preview episode, and I think it's a valid question to reiterate this time around.
I do think they have a better chance of making the conference finals. I think this team is just too good not to make the playoffs unless something catastrophic happens where everybody gets injured. If Shesterkin gets injured, if Panarin gets injured, if Fox gets injured, we could talk about it then. But if everybody's healthy, and if everybody plays the vast majority of the games of the season, I just don't see a world in which Shesterkin plays so poorly that they don't make it. Even if the Rangers play exactly the same that they did last season, Shesterkin will win this team to 40 plus wins. It will happen. The only way they don't make the playoffs is if everybody that's important to this team goes down with injury. So obviously, hopefully that doesn't happen. And I think the more likely situation of these two is that they make it far as opposed to not making it at all.
That brings up something that you had mentioned as something we could talk about, and I do think it's a good topic, are injuries something that you can kind of avoid to bake into the calculus? Because you had mentioned that they got really injury lucky last year. Other than Lindgren, nobody missed extended periods of time. There were a couple guys who missed a game here or there, but other than Lindgren, they were pretty healthy last year. A lot of guys played. There was the question of letting Trouba play the entire first half with that bad back where he was just awful. And then they had the All-Star break and he came back and he was relatively fine. He was a lot better than in the first half. And they changed medical staffs in the offseason. They got a new trainer. They overhauled some of the people who do that stuff for them. And I don't know if there's a question as far as what you can do to prevent that kind of thing, but it is a legitimate worry that injury regression comes back around because that's just something you can't really control. Hockey's an inherently violent game that's very random. It can happen to anyone at any time. Weird things happen, and you just kind of have to hope for the best.
They've been lucky to this point to be a relatively healthy team throughout the regular season and the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, Jacob Trouba playing through injury, which I don't know what. I never understand players. As there's a motorcycle that likes to that made a cameo appearance. Thank you for your guest appearance. Residuals will be in the mail. Like there's a case to be made that Jacob Trouba playing hurt only made everybody else worse because of it. Because if you're hurt, you're not a warrior or this tough guy by fighting through the pain and playing the game. You're only making the team worse by doing it because you're not at 100%, so you're not playing well, but therefore, like somebody that may not be as good as you, but is healthy, you're preventing them from taking the spot, so you're forcing yourself to play, and you're not playing well because you're injured. Like, dude, you're also exacerbating the injury. Dude, just sit out. Just sit out a week. Sit out 2 weeks. Sit out whatever you need to do. Get healthy, and then come back when you can actually play the game. Like the Rangers have been relatively healthy to this point, and that a lot of it's just pure luck. You can't, some big hits might not lead to injury, and some small ticky-tack kind of, maybe you fell the wrong way, maybe like somebody clipped you a certain way that didn't look bad on the replay, and then you're out for 6 weeks. Injuries are very luck dependent in this sport a lot of the time, so the Rangers have gotten relatively good luck on that front up until this point. Can they replicate that? I mean, luck is not something you can very much replicate. It comes and it goes, but with the new training staff that hopefully won't force players to play injured, or I don't want to say they force them, but like won't let them play injured, I will say. Hopefully they won't make or let players that are injured or not at 100% play when they don't have to.
Especially for long periods of time.
Right,
like
exactly.
1 or 2 games here and there are okay, but like we're talking about Trouba played the first 45 games with a lower back injury that really hampered how good he was. I want to say he was 42% expected goals against in the first half, and then in the second half he was 49, 50%. Like we're talking about a significant difference in play because he was playing injured, and some of that was probably his stubbornness, but at some point not being able to objectively look at things and be like, hey, this is hurting us, not helping us, that's an issue. That's a real issue that the Rangers haven't really, that is a real issue that the Rangers have repeatedly done in the past. That has been something they've done in the past where they're ignorant of what's going on and they are doing no, we'll figure it out. It's fine. It's fine. And that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, especially for you and I, where they're insulting our intelligence, telling us everything's fine. It's not. We're watching. We know it's not. Well, we know we can't just turn it on when the playoffs start. Then are you going to start trying? Like I vividly remember Patrick Kane doing an intermission interview, one of the first games after he got here, and him saying, well, we know that the playoffs are coming soon and we can't just turn it on and off. I don't know if he was just saying that, but nobody on the team seemed to take that particularly seriously. They did not last year. And it feels, I don't want to say premature to be worried only about the playoffs, before we've played one regular season game, but that's the expectation. That is realistically the expectation.
This team needs to, I don't want to say get serious. Like that seems like I don't know. It seems like a kind of a silly thing to say, but a lot of last season did feel like they weren't taking it too seriously. And then they got to the playoffs, didn't play seriously enough, and then were Pikachu shocked face when they got embarrassed by the Devils. Like, in order to play seriously or at 100% in the playoffs, you got to play that way in the regular season, because if you don't do that, because the problem with taking games off is that it leads to bad habits. It leads to, I skated at 75% capacity for these 6 weeks, and we won a lot of those games, so it's all good. I could just do the same thing and we'll be fine. And then you get to the playoffs and you're like, oh my God, like I'm not prepared for this. Oh, you're not prepared for it. Oh,
he wasn't ready.
I can't believe that you're not prepared for that. No way. Tell me more.
All right, let's get out of here. That'll do it for this week's episode. We'll be back next week. There will be actual hockey to talk about, which will probably
Hockey's
be
back tomorrow. The Rangers aren't playing, but we have NHL hockey tomorrow. Look at that.
Yes,
we made it, Nick. We've made it.
We got there. We survived. I will enjoy the 40 minutes before the game where ESPN only talks about Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks lose 5-2. I'm very much looking forward to tomorrow night. That'll be very fun.
He's going to score the goal though, so that's all.
Oh yes, yeah, exactly. That'll be fun. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you are, podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube as well. We see all the new people on YouTube. Welcome to the show. We're glad to see you. Glad you're here for the ride. We'll be back next week. Let's go Rangers, I guess.
Let's do it.